It was a cold January day, the day I was laid off. As I cleared my desk and prepared to leave my place of work for the last time, a sense of betrayal left me angry and confused. I was angry because I had just been informed that I was redundant, fired. Whatever you call it, I was unemployed for the first time in my career. I was confused because I had worked for the company for 10 years. In fact, I've been working for them since I graduated as an accountant. Little did I know that the company was about to be taken over by a larger city firm, and before I was told I was being sacked, I was working on a project that would lead to a long-awaited promotion. My boss explained that due to the current economic downturn, he had no choice but to accept the takeover. He apologized, but the new company did not need a local accountant since all aspects of my work were now centralized at the main office, and there were enough employees there to handle my volume of work. I left the building in a bit of a fog and got into my BMW 5 Series, although I'm unlikely to drive it for long. It was a company car, and I was kindly allowed to use it until the end of the month. I almost told them where they could put this car, but common sense prevailed. I needed a car to travel to interviews. I was confident that I would find a new job quickly, and with the severance package, we could survive for a while. My name is Gordon Wilson. I'm 34 years old, 170 centimeters tall, and a little overweight for my age, mainly because I can't keep fit at my desk. I also wear glasses to help me see small details on the computer. My wife, Anne, on the other hand, is a perfect size 12 and slightly taller than me at 173 cm. She has short blonde hair and still has the figure she had before our children, John, who is 5, and Pamela, who is only 4. We met in college. I was studying accounting and Anne was studying journalism. Our relationship developed according to the standard scenario: first dating and then close relationships. Sexually, we were both quite experienced. I admitted that I had 4 or 5 previous partners and Anne only had 2, but both of her relationships were long-term. We got married a year after we graduated and both quickly found jobs. Anne worked as a feature writer for the magazine until she became pregnant with our first child. John was born, and Anne quickly settled into her role as a mother. A few months later, we discussed returning to work, but she was determined to stay home to care for John. Besides, she said with a smile, John needs a brother or sister. And then 10 months later, our daughter Pamela was born. Anne is a real sorceress. Not only does she take care of the children, but she also takes the time to please me, do the shopping, clean the house, and take care of all the many issues I didn't even know I had before the events I'm about to talk about began. But what amazes me most is that despite all this, she still manages to freelance for the same magazine she worked for before we started our family. The job was perfect for her because she could choose her hours and fit them around her other commitments. I, on the other hand, was a bit of a chauvinist and tended to take everything she did for us for granted. Of course, I took care of the garden and did major renovations and painting in our house, but I soon realized that this aspect of life was greatly disrupted. When I returned home, my wife Anne was just returning from picking up the children from school. She was surprised that I came so early and, like me, was very indignant at my dismissal. After dinner, when the kids were asleep, we sat down to discuss our options. I explained that the severance package would provide us with enough money to maintain our normal lifestyle with a few savings here and there over 3 months. I've always been an optimist, a glass-full kind of person, so I told her I was confident I'd find a new job soon, especially with my experience and references. The next day, I started looking for a job. I updated my resume and started looking for jobs on job posting sites. On the first day, I found 5 jobs within reasonable walking distance of my home and sent in my resumes. I didn't want to move to another city since our parents lived nearby and were getting older. Days turned into weeks, and I continued to search, applying for every job that even remotely matched my qualifications, but to no avail. I continued to scour the internet, visit my local job center, and apply for unemployment benefits, income support, and other forms of government assistance. Not surprisingly, I was told that I would not receive anything until I spent all our savings in cash. The job center interview convinced me that they couldn't help me find a job unless I accepted a manual or low-paid office job. I attended a career development workshop, improved my interview skills, and sent my resume to all the major recruiting agencies while continuing to remain positive about my prospects. After 2 months of not receiving any interview invitations and only receiving responses to a few applications, I began to feel depressed and anxious. Our sex life had fallen into disarray, down to once a week, and Anne was beginning to get irritated with my lethargy and lack of encouragement. She started nagging me, demanding that I help more around the house, participate in activities, and so on. We had a heart-to-heart talk, and I promised that I would be more helpful. I avoided communicating with friends whom I had known for many years. I simply could not stand their questions about how my job search was going. I began to drink more and more and also bet on horses. Naturally, I didn't win and quickly accumulated significant debts. Anne, of course, found out about this because I was stupid enough to use our credit card for betting. We had a huge fight, and I had to promise that I wouldn't play again. In a way, I was glad she found out because the guilt was weighing heavily on my shoulders. Up to this point, I had controlled the family finances, allocating Anne a monthly amount for housekeeping and a separate amount for her personal expenses. As part of the settlement of my debts, Anne took over the management of the family budget. She clearly wanted to follow the money and still didn't trust me when I said my gambling habits were a thing of the past. In a way, I couldn't blame her, since I was the one who got into this mess, but although I always kept the accounts completely accessible to Anne so she could see where the money was being spent, she blocked access to all the accounts for me. Now I had to ask her for money if I needed to pay anything. This really embarrassed me and was actually the reason I stopped going to the pub on weekends for a few pints unless she was there with me. March came when she dropped a real bomb on me. She was offered a full-time job as an editor for the magazine she wrote for, which meant she would have to use a car for her daily commute to the office, which was about 20 miles from home. She said she accepted the offer because the salary was higher than what I received when I worked. To some extent, I was happy for her. She was right, we really needed the money. Our mortgage was starting to fall behind and our savings were almost dry. What irritated me was that she made this decision without consulting me. This was the first I heard about it. I asked, "How long have you known about this job?" "It's been sitting on the table for a couple of months, but I was hoping you'd find a job, so I put off the decision until yesterday," she replied. "Haven't you thought about talking to me at least once during this time?" I said, heated. 2 whole months, and you haven't found a moment to raise this issue. "If you weren't so depressed and gloomy, I would talk to you," she replied. "Anyway, now that I start working full-time, we will need to make some changes in our daily life. Firstly, you will do all the household chores that I have done so far. I made a list so you can start learning what to do." I looked at the list, and it was much more extensive than I expected. It included cleaning, childcare, and much more. "I have a problem with this list," I said. She looked at me questioningly, and I continued, "First of all, you know that I don't know how to cook, and I have no idea how a washing machine works." "Well, you'll have to learn, just like me," she replied reproachfully. "Anyway, I'll text you instructions," she said, her voice softening. I thought that if she can do all this and still find time to work part-time, then perhaps it shouldn't be difficult for me to learn. That's how I ended up in the role of a house owner. At first, it was terribly frustrating. My cooking was a disaster, and Anne took every opportunity to remind me of it. Finally, her patience ran out. "You can't even cook a simple dish according to a recipe. The books are all in the kitchen. It's probably not that difficult to cook something basic. I don't expect anything special from you, but sausage, egg, and potatoes 2 nights in a row is already too much." The truth was that I hated it. Not only cooking, but also washing, ironing, cleaning everything. The only consolation was that I spent more time with John and Pamela. They were great and tried to help, but more often than not their help only made the mess worse. However, the sincere expressions on their faces when they tried to help made me laugh. Washing and ironing clothes was a real challenge. Once I figured out the difference between hot and cold washes, what powders and tablets to use, and what fabric softeners were, I mixed whites with colors as usual, and the results were predictable. I couldn't find time to rest. This householder was really starting to get irritated trying to keep the house clean and look after the kids, as well as take them to school and daycare with appropriate, clean clothes. One evening, after Anne had been working full-time for about a month, she came home full of energy, telling me all about the office intrigue and fascinating stories from her workday. I'll admit I was jealous, envious, and angry as hell. Angry because it was my birthday and I tried to make at least an edible dinner, only to find out that she wasn't hungry because her boss, the CEO, had invited her to lunch at some fancy bistro. I exploded. I'm tired of everything. I don't think you appreciate the effort I put into preparing this dinner. I was without adult communication all day, washed and ironed all my things, put the house in order, and you didn't even bother to call to wish me a happy birthday. She looked shocked and realized that she had completely forgotten about my birthday. I thought she would apologize a little and show remorse, but instead she went on the offensive. Listen to yourself, I used to do all this, and you never expressed gratitude, and now that the situation has changed, you are acting like a real hysteric. You should be grateful that I came home on time. I had a chance to go to dinner, and I almost said yes. Maybe you should go, at least someone would be lucky, unlike me lately, I answered. I wanted to bite off my tongue when I said these words, but I realized that it was too late, they were spoken out loud. What is this supposed to mean? I work really hard to support us all, and you keep complaining that I'm not intimate with you often enough. Next time I'm invited to dinner, I might as well say yes, she answered threateningly. With these words, she rushed upstairs to our bedroom and slammed the door. That night, I slept in the guest room, and this continued for several nights. We didn't talk until the weekend. On Saturday, after the kids had gone to bed, Anne came up to me with a glass of wine in each hand and said, "I'm so sorry for forgetting your birthday and for the harsh words I said that night. You didn't deserve to be treated like that. I love you, and I know it's very hard for you right now, but it's not easy for me either." She handed me a glass of wine, and we stood there sipping our drinks and just looking at each other. She then said, "I miss the children, sitting with them, reading them stories and playing with them. It's hard for me too. I'm jealous of the way they treat you. You're much more patient with them than I am, and they always turn to you if they have questions. It makes me feel superfluous as their mother." As we sat there drinking wine, we talked openly about our frustrations. For my part, I explained that I felt less of a man in the role of a housewife and all the roles that it included. That and the fact that my wife found a job that paid better than what I was earning, while working did not help me cope with my feelings of inferiority. In addition, constantly hearing her criticize my culinary skills and shortcomings in housekeeping also did not add confidence. I told her that I was still applying for jobs, and even for jobs that would require us to move if I was successful. She didn't object to my search, but warned me that she thought it would take an exceptional offer to make her decide to leave her job. "Anyway," she added, "I don't want to quit my job. I love being a breadwinner and the opportunity it offers to expand our social circle." "What a social circle? I haven't seen any expansion until now," I said. "Oh, that's about to change. We were invited to dinner the following Saturday at Jim and Pat Cairns' house," she said. "Do I know them?" I asked. "You've probably heard of Jim. He's the CEO of our magazine, and his wife is pure fire, or so they say," she replied. "Fire?" I asked. "What does it mean?" "They say that at their parties, after port and brandy, the fun begins. We don't have to stay if it gets too uncomfortable," she said, trying to calm my obvious anger. "But it might be what we need to spice up our sex lives. She's been a little quiet lately, haven't you noticed?" We once discussed the idea of swapping partners early in our marriage, and although we were attracted to it, we agreed that the risks to our marriage were too great. So this situation really surprised me. Are you saying that you're so disappointed in my efforts that you want to try with other men? I answered. Of course not. I just thought that if we agreed and came, we could just watch and see how things would develop. I spoke to Jim when he invited us, and he was keen for us to join their little circle. We were under no obligation to participate and could leave at any time. You mean he told you that he and Pat were switching partners just like that? I asked. No, of course not. It came up indirectly when we were discussing a story about alternative lifestyles for the next issue. I told him that we had talked about it, but were worried about how it might affect our marriage. That's when he told me about Pat and his decision to open their marriage. He said it wasn't right for every couple, but in their case, they liked the variety and it gave their marriage new life. She went on to tell me that the group only met once a month and always took a summer break in July and August when their children were home. I wondered about this, and apparently Pat and Jim sent their two sons to boarding school. So during school holidays, they suspended their parties. I wasn't sure about this latest development, of course. Our sex life wasn't great at the moment, and I have to admit that the idea of having another woman appealed to me, as did the idea of watching Anne with another man or woman. But here we go, are we the same after this? Anne stood up and, taking my hand, said, "Let's go to bed and think about it. I don't need to confirm until Monday." That night, I must admit, I was completely aroused, and the idea she instilled stuck with me. "Please, can I tell you that we will come next Saturday? It will be the last one before the summer break," she said almost pleadingly. That's it, I was tricked like a fish baited, hooked and caught, so I just said, "Why not? Maybe this is exactly what we need." The rest of the weekend was uneventful except for our sex life. Anne was insatiable both in and out of bed. She dressed provocatively when we went shopping in the city. She wore jeans and a low-cut t-shirt, nothing provocative about it, except that she wasn't wearing a bra. Of course, everyone else could see it, and she loved how all the men stared at her as we walked through the mall. When we got home, we fed the kids and ourselves, and we both waited with growing impatience until it was time for them to go to bed. As soon as we put them aside, we indulged in intimacy. Later, lying with my body pressed, I asked, "What triggered this then? Was it because all these men wanted your sexy body, or was it just my irresistible charisma?" When I saw these men looking at my breasts, it turned me on. "But did you notice what happened when I was in the fitting room trying on that dress I wanted for the party next week?" she asked. "No, if you remember, I was trying to entertain the children. You went alone to try it on." "And then what happened?" I asked, not holding back my curiosity. "Well, I walked into the dressing room, closing the curtain behind me, but not all the way, leaving a small gap. I stripped down to my panties and had just turned around to pull on the dress when I looked up, hands behind my head, and realized I saw a man in the mirror who was standing outside the booth. He looked straight at me and smiled, and I realized that he saw me practically naked. I should have been furious at the intrusion, but instead I felt excited, so I decided to screw it and continued to pull the dress on. It didn't fit me, so I took it off, this time taking my time so he could get a good look at my body. When I looked up to see if he noticed my little display, I was surprised to see that he was not alone. There were two more men standing next to him. They tried not to look too obvious to the others, but openly looked at my breasts. I saw how they suddenly retreated when the saleswoman approached, and quickly. I closed the curtain. I got dressed and returned the dress to the saleswoman, and she smiled at me and looked sharply, as if to say, "I know what you did," so I left as quickly as possible. The men also disappeared, so I managed to avoid any embarrassment of meeting them face to face, so to speak. Her story caused a definite reaction in me, but I still decided to draw the line for her that I would never share it with anyone and never. On Monday, I got up and made us breakfast. Anne was not in the mood. Mornings had never been her forte. She was an evening person, so she grabbed a quick piece of toast and ran out the door. She was late and blamed me for forgetting to set the alarm, even though the damn thing was on her side of the bed, so it wasn't the best start to the day. I struggled to get the kids ready for school. John was cranky and didn't want to eat breakfast, and Pamela couldn't be hurried. Just like her mother, I thought. Finally, we left the house and walked a mile to John's school. Pamela was still in kindergarten, as she was not yet old enough for big school. Other mothers were standing at the school gates talking as I returned after taking both children to their classes. The day started out as a warm early summer day when we left the house, but as soon as I left school, the sky burst into rain. Damn, I thought, this was just not enough. I went out only in a light jacket, and without a raincoat, I would get wet to the skin. A large Range Rover SUV pulled up, and the window rolled down. It was one of the mothers who stood at the gate and talked as I left the school. She simply said, "Sit down before you get wet." When I got into the car and put on my seatbelt, she introduced herself as Andrea Carter and asked for directions to my house. I showed her the way back, and as she drove, I took the opportunity to get a good look at her. She was an attractive woman with dark hair, and even at this time of morning, she had time to apply makeup and make sure her hair was perfect. Andrea had an easy grace in her movements and seemed to have the confidence of someone who knows she is attractive. She was a skilled and fast driver. When she changed gears, her short skirt rose a little, revealing her slender hips. She must have noticed that I was watching her, and turning her head slightly, she said, "Will you recognize me if you see me again?" I blushed and apologized. "Sorry, I didn't mean to stare, but I have a feeling I should know you." She giggled and said, "Don't you remember that awkward girl in middle school who sat next to you for a year?" I immediately remembered her name. "Andrea Niven, I would never recognize you. You have changed so much since I last saw you, but then again, that was almost 20 years ago. Your family moved in second grade, but I didn't know you were back. How did you recognize me?" She just laughed and said, "You're quite noticeable with your red hair and glasses. If I had any doubts, your identity was confirmed by the director when I asked who you were. I noticed that now you always take the children. Is your wife sick?" Then I briefly told her about my new role as a housewife. By then, we were already at my house, and I asked if she had time for a cup of coffee. She had time, and we quickly jogged along the path, trying to beat the rain. I apologized for the mess in the house, but she just laughed and said, "You should see mine at the moment. I just leave everything until I get the kids to school, and then clean it up when I get back." She was very easy to communicate with, and I found myself answering her questions. She asked how I liked being a full-time stay-at-home mom, and I complained about how hard it was for me, especially cooking. She said, "That's easy to fix. What are you planning for dinner tonight?" I replied, "Something simple, probably bangers, beans, and fries." "We can do much better. Do you have mince and pasta in the kitchen pantry?" I quickly searched the freezer and found some minced meat, and also found a tall can of spaghetti and brought them to the table. She asked for canned tomatoes, garlic, and bay leaves, and I managed to find everything I needed. She then helped me make the sauce and gave me a lesson on how to make spaghetti. Coffee and cooking class over, Andrea looked at her watch and realized that we had spent most of the morning together. She kissed me on the cheek, and as she walked towards the door, she turned and said, "Some of us mothers meet every Wednesday morning for fellowship and coffee. Why don't you join us? Maybe you can get some more cooking tips from the others." "I don't know, you'd better ask the others first before inviting me. After all, they might feel bad about a man ruining their girls' get-togethers. Just leave them with me. I'll pick you up after we drop the kids off on Wednesday, okay?" she asked. I nodded and replied, "I'll wait for it." For the first time in years, I felt like I had something to be happy about outside of marriage and running a home. Anne didn't comment on that evening's dinner, but the children noticed and praised it, saying it was even better than their mother's. Not the most tactful remark, but these are children. Later, when we were in bed, Anne asked me where I learned to cook spaghetti, and I told her about meeting Andrea and her help. She asked, "Do I have reason to be jealous?" Of course not. She's just an old friend helping a man in need. We kissed and wished each other good night. On Wednesday, I met Andrea, and she introduced me to two other women at the school gates. June Hall was about 22 years old and about 162 centimeters tall. She had what is politely called a fuller figure, but she had a mischievous laugh, and I thought we would get along well. Pat Rollo was taller and older, about 28, and she looked rather plain at first glance, but as I later learned, with her combat makeup and stylish clothes, she could rival anyone. I got into Andrea's car, and the other two followed in their cars. We parked near a large, detached house. Andrea opened the door and let us inside. Waving happily to Pat, she said, "Pat, you can do the Gordon tour, but avoid my bedroom. I haven't had time to tidy it up yet." As we toured the house, I quickly realized that the furnishings and decor matched the outside appearance. Wow, I thought, this lifestyle is a little out of my league, and I began to worry how they would perceive our home when it was my turn to be the boss. "Coffee is ready," Andrea called, and we returned to the winter garden and began to discuss the world. I didn't say much on that first coffee morning, not that I didn't want to contribute, but I was a little confused by the topics discussed. They started, as I suspected, with ordinary neighborhood gossip. They were discussing a married woman who lived nearby and was allegedly having a passionate affair with her personal trainer. The girls did not discriminate based on my gender and continued to discuss the woman of easy virtue, which turned into comments about the shortcomings of their own husbands both in and out of bed. It seemed that I was one of them, and not a member of the male gender. In a way, it was flattering that they didn't see me as a threat or as someone who would betray them to their husbands at the drop of a hat. On the other hand, I was upset that they had little regard for how I would perceive their openness about their spouses. It was almost time for lunch, and Andrea said, "Time for today's cooking lesson. Gordon can't cook, so I challenge everyone to come up with a dish that is easy to make and that a complete beginner can make. No offense, Gordon, but you said it yourself that you're a newbie." "Only in the kitchen," I answered with a smile, and everyone laughed. With cooking lessons, notes, and phone numbers to call if I had trouble cooking, I left and went home, thinking about everything. That evening, I tried one of the recipes and enjoyed the praise that came back to me. I began to enjoy cooking, realizing that it was not as difficult as I first thought. Anne became interested in this new talent, and when I explained where I had learned about women's coffee mornings and cooking classes, she quickly named the group Gordon's Harem. Only later did she begin to call them Gordon's Coven. Saturday evening arrived, and Anne was as excited as I had ever seen her. She refused me sex all week, said she wanted me to be at my best on Saturday. She was wearing a cream dress. I think it was a sheath dress. It was quite cut out and exposed the top of her full breasts as she bent over. Also, the dress ended just above the knees, but it fit her like a second skin. She asked if she should wear a bra, but I said, "Don't worry, I like the way it looks. It'll ruin the line of the dress anyway." She agreed with a smile and warned that she was wearing only a dress, thong, and shoes. "Don't you think I'm too dressed up?" she said with a mischievous smile on her face. We arrived at Jim and Pat Cairns's address, and I was shocked by its size. This was not a suburb in an elite area, but a real mansion on its own grounds. We had to stop and press the bell to open the gate before we could pull into the driveway. There were four large, expensive cars parked outside, and I couldn't help but feel jealous of the owners. Our slightly scratched four-year-old Ford made them look like Formula One cars. Jim Cairns was waiting at the door with his wife Pat. Introductions were made, and he invited us to his house. Once inside, Jim hung out with us for a few minutes and said he wanted to have a quick chat before the evening's activities began. He explained that the people we were going to meet were all experienced in exchanging, and in order to protect each other from problems, they had a few rules that he wanted to convey. Rule 1, we do not use condoms, so protection is the responsibility of women. Rule 2, only married couples participate in these parties, strictly no singles. Rule 3, members are only allowed to be intimate with people other than their spouses at the monthly parties. Dating with members outside of monthly sex parties is not encouraged. Rule 4, if any participant decides to engage in sexual activity with a third party outside the group, They must use a condom. Rule 5, no or stop, means just that. No exceptions are allowed. Rule 6, photos and videos are not allowed. Any comments? He asked. I said, it all seems very clinical and straightforward to me. Look, he said, we are all adults and as such should be aware of the risks of disease, so these rules are intended to minimize risks. We cannot control Rule 4, but it is in the best interests of all involved to keep each other safe. Some of our guests are quite prominent public figures, so tact is required. We do not film or record these events for obvious reasons, and the no singles rule is intended to provide some privacy to our personal relationships. The rules are made for our protection. If you cannot accept them, you better leave now. We assured him that we accepted the rules, and he began introducing us to 3 other couples. I had difficulty remembering the names and the respective spouses. I know Alan and Jean were there, Simon and Judy, and Peter and Belinda, or Belle as she preferred to be called. I noticed that the women were all dressed expensively and impeccably made up. Belle was especially striking in her beauty. She was much younger than the others, and I rightly or unfairly considered her a trophy wife. The men seemed to be gathered at one end of the room, while the women sat and chatted, as women are able to do in the blink of an eye. Men, on the other hand, looked older than their wives. I recognized Alan because he was a prominent figure in local politics. During pre-dinner drinks, I learned that Simon was a magistrate and Peter was a chief inspector of police. I felt embarrassed when I admitted that I was a housewife, and I saw from the looks that there were guys who immediately categorized me as a weakling. I was looking for Anne and met her gaze. She smiled and shrugged. She seemed happy, so I went back to what the other men were talking about. At some point, Jim and Peter excused themselves. They had urgent matters to discuss. I took the opportunity to ask Alan where the toilet was, and after receiving instructions, I went to the toilet. When I returned, I took a wrong turn and found myself wondering which way to turn. I heard voices from the open door and walked past, but stopped when I heard Jim say, Anne will be a great addition to our little group, but take your time tonight. I've spent the last 2 months preparing her for this evening. She's ready, but her husband isn't sure, so we need to take it slow and not disturb them. Peter replied, Don't worry, I can handle him. I think he's a bit of a wimp, you know, a grown man who stays at home and lets his wife support him. Look, that's what I'm trying to say. He'll figure it out soon once Pat and Belle get their hooks on him. Peter said, Okay, message received and understood. Can't wait to get Anne. She's great and looks ripe for it. We better run. Dinner will be served soon. I quickly left and found myself at the reception, where everyone was standing and ready to go to dinner. Dinner was great. I sat next to Pat, and she tried to calm me down. She explained that they always hire a caterer when they have parties, but they always leave right after dessert. I tried to focus on what she was saying, but my thoughts kept going back to the conversation I overheard earlier. What should we worry about? We are here by choice, and I saw no reason why exchanging partners for the evening should deter us. What else was involved? After dinner, we moved to another room. This one was set up for seduction, with soft lighting and scented candles. There was a large flat-screen TV in one corner, and seeing that everyone had brandy or port, Jim said, turning on the video player, This is the video Pat and I made earlier this year. The screen came to life and showed images of Pat and Jim on vacation, apparently somewhere hot, since they were wearing almost nothing. Anne and I had watched an adult video before, and there was nothing unusual about the video, so my attention turned to Pat, who was sitting next to me on the couch. She leaned over to whisper something in my ear, and her dress opened wide, revealing her firm breasts. Seeing where I was looking, she smiled and said, Do you like it? I remained speechless, just nodded. She raised her hand and, pulling my head, kissed me. When I came up for air, I looked to where I had last seen Anne and saw her in Peter's arms. His hands were everywhere, and she didn't resist, so I went back to Pat, and soon we were having sex. As we slowly came to our senses, I collected my thoughts and began looking for Anne. I was worried that she might change her mind about going to this party. Our intention of just observing disappeared as soon as I had the opportunity to get another woman. They say the male body has no conscience. What a selfish bastard. I didn't take Anne into account and didn't give her the opportunity to gracefully refuse. I had nothing to worry about, as when I looked to where Anne was last, I saw her. But it wasn't Peter with her, as I expected, as that was the last I saw of who she was with, and Jim. Pat, noticing the direction of my gaze, smiled and said, "Jim too, Peter was already with her." As she stood up, she looked at me and said, "Let me get you a drink and something to help you recover." Looks like I wasn't the only one who was exhausted. The others started getting dressed and Belle, and I also made our last attempt, so we got dressed too. As we prepared to leave, Jim announced that the next meeting would be at Peter and Belle's, and it would be a barbecue instead of a formal dinner. He also reminded everyone that this would be the last meeting before returning to school and asked that they bring swimsuits, as there would be a pool and hot tub. Jean simply said, "Why bother? If the party tonight was the benchmark, they won't be needed, at least not for long." We all laughed at the truth in that statement as we said goodbye. I started talking to Anne about the evening's events in the car on the way home, but she fell asleep before I pulled out of the driveway. At home, we both staggered to the bed and collapsed. I was going to take a shower, but I was too tired to care. He'll still be there in the morning, I thought as my head hit the pillow. I woke up before Anne, quickly showered and dressed, then made breakfast. I was putting a full English breakfast on a tray to take upstairs when Anne appeared in a short robe. We exchanged greetings, and she sat down at the table. She said she was a little nervous and anxious at first, but once it all started, she just went with the flow. She admitted that she liked how everything went and received a lot of positive emotions. We both agreed that we needed to be careful about certain things in the future, and I advised her not to be alone with Peter. She agreed to be on the lookout. She said, "I guess you want to go to the next party, right?" "Yes, I think so. Remind me, I thought you said last night's party was the last one before the school holidays, but Jim announced another one at the end of the month." She said with a grin, "I guess I got the dates mixed up or added another one to make sure we were all in before the holidays." After the discussion, she went to pick up the kids from the grandparents while I mowed the front lawn. Things calmed down a bit in the following weeks. I still applied for jobs, most of them much further from home, but the responses were not encouraging. My housekeeping skills improved to the point where I had free time and became bored sitting at home. Walking the kids to and from school unexpectedly helped me shed the extra pounds I had gained. I am physically fitter than I have been in years, but the problem of lack of transportation added to my frustration, as it limited my ability to use my time. I made peace with this because I didn't have any spare money to spend even if I had transportation, and still had strict control over finances, and I learned not to ask about household expenses. This was really starting to irritate me. I was a trained accountant. I knew how to handle large sums of money, but I was being excluded from access to the details of our finances. I didn't even have a credit card. Anne insisted that I didn't need her since she was now paying all the major bills. Gordon's harem was a salvation in many ways. These women walked me through a basic home skills course, and I learned the basics of preparing quick and easy meals. The children certainly appreciated the improvement. Anne was less inclined to do so and began calling them Gordon's Coven. I think she was jealous of how well I had adapted to being a housewife, so she renamed them. It was Andrea Carter who gave me the opportunity to escape the life of a stay-at-home mom, even if just for a little while each week. At one of our coffee mornings, she asked if I was interested in doing part-time accounting work for her son-in-law, Sam Rawlings. It turned out he owned a business selling used cars, and the IRS was putting pressure on him. His accountant was ill, and his annual reports were badly overdue. I said I would be happy to help. I was thinking about opening my own accounting practice, but felt I didn't have enough local contacts to be successful. Now, I thought, here's my chance. If I can impress Sam Rawlings, maybe it will lead to more orders. I thanked Andrea and called Sam immediately. He asked me to come to his garage that afternoon to discuss the problem with his books. I agreed that Andrea would pick up both of us when she picked up her children and went to Sam. When he showed me his books and handed me a plastic bag full of receipts, he said, "These are all the various operating expenses. I tried to get receipts for everything." He seemed to expect praise. Receipts for what? I need to know what each one was spent on. The tax authorities may require proof of purchase. Do you have invoices for each item? I asked. He said he had some somewhere, so I tasked him with finding them while I started working on the sales journal. A quick check confirmed that this was going to be a lot more work than I thought. Everything was recorded in accounting books: purchases, sales, expenses, and salaries. The first task is to transfer all this to my computer, and then I can continue. After about an hour of digging, I had a general idea of how he controls his business. This was bad, and I suggested the best solution was to take his records and develop a computer accounting program that he could use on a daily basis. I told him the approximate cost, and he blanched a little at the price, but I told him I would save him double that in the first year, but only if he strictly used the system. He perked up, and my first client was bribed. That evening, I returned home after picking up the kids from Andrea, a little later than Anne, and she was annoyed that I hadn't cooked dinner. I was about to tell her about my new business when something inside me warned me to be careful. This could end badly in the end, and I don't want to hear more demeaning sarcasm from her. So I just said, "I got busy and forgot the time. We can order takeout if you want." She agreed, and after checking what everyone would like, we decided to order Chinese food. Luckily, it was delivered, and we sat down to eat about 45 minutes later. Over lunch, Anne told the kids and me that she had booked our summer holiday at Euro Disney Paris, followed by a week in the West Coast resort area of Les Balles. I was a little upset because we had discussed Euro Disney before Christmas, before I was fired, but haven't discussed anything since. I was about to confront her about this when she distracted me by engaging the children in a conversation about what they wanted to do first. Seeing the excitement in their eyes at this prospect, I decided to wait and express my opinion later. After dinner, we both played with the kids until they went to bed, and after they were asleep, Anne said, "I have a surprise for you too." I wondered what the surprise was and began to ask her when she silenced me and, taking my hand, led me to the garage. She opened the door, and instead of our old worn-out Ford, there was a new Lexus sedan. I was stunned. How could we afford such an expensive car? When I asked, she replied calmly, "My probation ended earlier than planned." Jim said he was thrilled with my contribution during my 4 months of full-time work. One of the benefits of this new permanent position is access to the company's auto loan program. She said Jim made all the arrangements for her new car a few weeks ago, and it was delivered today. "Do you like it?" she asked, not hiding the excitement in her voice. "Of course," I said rather dejectedly, "but where is Ford?" "I sold it to one of the employees. Her car just broke down, and she needed wheels to get to work, so I sold it right away." This seriously pissed me off. Did she even think about leaving the Ford for me? "How long have you known about this new car?" I asked sharply. "Oh, it was ordered a few weeks ago, but I had to wait for it to arrive in the right color." She remained completely unaware of the warning tone in my voice. "Did you even think about consulting me about choosing a car? Have you ever considered keeping the Ford for me?" I demanded, becoming angrier by the second. Before she could answer these questions, I continued angrily, "I'm sick of you making decisions without consulting me. First your job, then our family vacation, and now the car. I want access to family accounts. I need to make sure you don't overestimate our capabilities with these decisions." She lost her temper and immediately replied, "You know perfectly well why I took over the accounting. If you had not risked our savings, you would still be managing them. As for consulting with you, why should I? I make money in this family, not you. When you contribute financially to our economy, you will be consulted on every decision, but until then you can go to hell." Even harsher words followed, and I was sure that she no longer respected me. Realizing this, I suddenly fell silent, and during a pause in our quarrel, I quietly said, "I'll organize an overnight stay in the guest room from now on. You made it clear that any love and respect you may have had for me in our marriage is gone. Divorce is your decision since I don't have money for it, but you can do what you want. I will not leave the family home as I am still the primary caring parent for our children. You, on the other hand, can do as you please. You've been practically doing this since I got fired, so it shouldn't be hard for you." This statement suddenly stopped her angry tirade. She looked at me, surprise visible on her face, and stammered, What? What do you mean divorce? Who was talking about divorce?" "Actually, I did," I replied, keeping my voice emotionless. "I think we both know we have problems. You don't seem to love or care about me anymore. That's obvious. I was stupid enough to think that your disrespect was a temporary thing brought on by the pressures of the new job, but in hindsight, it started earlier, probably when I first got fired. But I love you, you should know that. Why would I work hard if not to keep our family together? Sorry if I was rude recently, but you have a lot to do with it too," she replied, determined to have the last word, as always. I hate quarrels, I always have. Anne was always too quick with her lines and always ready to respond, whereas I needed time to prepare and rehearse my statements, and I knew that when our arguments turned into verbal fights, I lost. This time I was determined to finish everything before it got to that level. I may have contributed to this sorry state of affairs. I apologize for not finding another job, but now almost 2 million of us are in a similar position. However, I think you need to think about your behavior lately. If you believe that you have been fair and supportive to me and the children, then there is truly no hope for us. Another thing you might want to think about is if we get divorced, who do you think will be given custody of John and Pamela?" With that, I left her standing there, speechless for once, and it felt good. I removed my things from the bedroom and moved into the guest room. The next few days were quite difficult and hardly spoke politely to me. Instead of regretting her attitude, she seemed intent on putting me down at every opportunity. Finally, I told her to keep quiet unless she was ready to talk like mature adults. "I will talk to you the way I like," she answered sharply, leaving for work in her new car. After I dropped the kids off at school, I called on Sam Rawlings with his completed tax return and VAT application. He was very pleased with this, since now he could get rid of the tax office. He asked how I wanted to be paid for the work done, and I asked in cash. He looked at me with a question on his lips as I said, "Listen, I'm an accountant, and I just looked at your books. Your business generates far more cash transactions than I expected given the cost of the products. I don't need the details, but I hope you're careful not to leave any traces for the IRS to investigate. Paper and electronic transactions are easily verified by them. Your lifestyle should also be consistent. Any sudden purchases of a large amount or living above the stated income will alert them. On paper, your business is now neat and tidy, but late filing of returns will also attract their attention." He looked at me and winked, saying, "I'm a lucky player, horses, dogs, or cards, it doesn't matter. I always come out a winner." I smiled, acknowledging his casual way of admitting that his business dealings weren't all clean and transparent. As I was about to leave, he asked, "You always walk when you come here, don't you drive?" I simply answered briefly that my wife uses the car for work and that we cannot afford to buy a second car at the moment. "Come here," he said, pointing to a beautiful Honda Civic. I just arrived, he's 8 years old, and I was going to give him up for auction. It's just too old for my gas station, but it drives great. I will give it to you in exchange for the work you do for me." We discussed the price he wanted for it, and he finally agreed to sell it to me for £1,000. No cash required. We shook hands on business, and I went home instead of waiting for the bus. I used the money Sam had just given me to pay my insurance and road tax, so I was legal too. The kids were delighted to see me when I picked them up and jumped into the car with almost no comment. The story was different when Anne returned home. The children immediately broke the news as soon as she walked through the door. She demanded to know where I got the money to buy the car and for operating costs. I simply said, "Not from you." Of course, she didn't leave it at that, and I finally told her what I was doing with Sam Rawlings. She softened after my story and then asked, "Are you going to grow your accounting business?" "If I can, I will. I have time to work, and I hope Sam will introduce me to some of his contacts. It's early days, but I'll wait and see how things unfold." Dinner was much calmer than the last few days. After dinner, I worked on developing Sam's model, as I called the project. Just before going to bed, Anne came into the guest room where I was sleeping and where the computer was installed and handed me an envelope. She quickly left before I could ask what it was. I opened it, and on the first page was the password to the household finance file with a brief summary of the balance sheet of our situation. The second was a handwritten apology for her recent inattention and lack of appreciation. I knew this was a big concession on her part. I also realized that expecting her to openly admit her rudeness in words was too much. She was many things to me, but it was difficult for her to admit her mistakes. I was pleased with her apology, but something inside me called for caution. Was her apparent repentance just a ploy to get us back together, or was it a genuine attempt to heal the wounds? I wasn't sure, and I still wasn't sure when I walked into the living room. Anne sat and watched TV, saying, "Thanks for the note and apology. You know that I love and adore you. You're the only girl I've ever loved, but what happened after I was fired hurt me deeper than I thought. I'm still not sure if we have a future, so let's take it one day at a time." "Fine." I could tell by the look on her face that she didn't like my answer, but she simply said, "Okay, whatever, but know one thing. I love you and I want you back in my bed." I said I wasn't ready for that yet, and she cried when I left. Days passed, and we both tried to restore our old lives. One night she asked, "Are we going to Peter and Belle's party?" "I don't want to go. We are just beginning to rebuild our marriage. Do you think it's smart to exchange partners with others when we don't sleep together?" Anne smiled wistfully and said, "We can decide the latter anytime you're ready, you know that. As for the party, I don't want to go either until we are sure of our future." About a week later, Anne came home from work and breathlessly said, "Peter has been suspended from the police force pending an investigation into an alleged assault on a prisoner. I can't say I'm surprised. He can be a tough diamond sometimes. Do you remember what he did to you at the party?" She didn't respond to this, but continued. "Jim has decided to postpone any future parties until the dust settles around Peter. Many questions are being asked, not only about his professional activities, but also about his personal life." The Friday after this announcement was our wedding anniversary. We decided to go out to dinner and leave the kids with my parents for the night. Anne was simply stunning. She wore a short black dress that showed off her plunging neckline. It was obvious that she was not wearing a bra, as her back was bare to the top of her buttocks. I complimented her on her choice of outfit, and she smiled and thanked me for my attention. We had a wonderful dinner, and I ordered a second bottle of wine to finish the meal. We spent most of the evening reminiscing about the good times, oblivious to the other diners. After Anne paid the bill and I went to the men's room for a quick escape, I came back and Anne was deep in conversation with the guy at the bar. I quickly recognized him as Simon, one of Jim's partygoers. He was clearly a little drunk. Anne didn't do anything to stop him, and when I approached, she introduced him to me again. She also explained that she was trying to get his permission to interview him and Judy about alternative lifestyles. She explained that she wanted to do a special article and that all the people involved would not be identified but mentioned. It turned out that he and Judy had also dined at the restaurant and had just finished their meal with brandy and coffee. He invited us to join them for one last drink before heading home. We agreed and must have spent almost an hour talking. Anne was over the moon. They agreed to participate in her article on the condition that their identities would be protected. It started to rain as we stood in the lobby, waiting for a break to quickly get to our car. Peter was about to call a taxi, as they had drunk too much to risk driving, when Anne suggested that I give them a lift home. She explained that she wanted to discuss the article with him and asked Judy if she would mind sitting next to me in the front as it would make the conversation easier if they sat side by side. As I drove and Judy gave me directions, we talked about our families and discovered that we had very similar backgrounds. She was a beautiful woman with long brown hair, and although I had a vague suspicion of how they were leading an alternative lifestyle, it still came as a surprise when they revealed, "We're into a few things, nothing too serious, and we only practice our little secret. In the privacy of your home, you are welcome to come and see our small collection of toys." I answered evasively, "I'm not sure we have time today." Anne must have just overheard our conversation because she interrupted by saying, "Of course, we'd like to know a little more about your lifestyle." So the decision was made. I thought I had been outplayed again. When we arrived at their home, it was a completely ordinary detached Victorian house with 3 or 4 bedrooms, no different from many others on the street. We walked in and Peter offered us drinks. I refused because I was driving, but Anne accepted the brandy. After a little explanation of what was so attractive to them, Judy took us down to their basement. It was a revelation to me, but Anne took it all in stride. They had the usual things associated with their hobby: black leather, face masks, whips. However, the central element was a setup reminiscent of medieval shackles, with holes to securely fasten the arms, legs, and head. Peter said, "We only left the equipment in sight because we knew our children would be away that weekend. We keep the more extreme items locked away, and the basement is always locked and inaccessible to them." Seeing how engrossed Anne was in their toys, Peter asked if she wanted to try anything. Anne backed down a little and said, "Not today, but I'm sure we'd like to come back another time and watch with your toys." Once again, Anne made decisions involving actions in which I had no part. However, I couldn't be mad at her for this decision, since the idea of keeping her helpless in those shackles was quite attractive to me at that moment. We went back upstairs, and Judy made us coffee, and we agreed to come back the following weekend. When we got home and walked through the door, Anne turned and lunged at me, kissing me and trying to take my jacket off at the same time. For my part, I was extremely horny. We hadn't made love in weeks, and the images of Anne in those shackles fueled my desire. Our clothes fell off as we walked up the stairs, and we were both naked when we reached the bedroom. Later, as she lay talking, she asked, "What do you think about trying out the Judy and Peter scene?" I apologize for never asking if it was okay for you before agreeing, but you seemed very interested at the time. I don't want to go there at all. I don't want to be dominant. The thought of hurting you, even if you enjoy it, is not something I like. I definitely don't want to be a submissive. I don't like the idea of shackles at all," I answered. She said, "You don't trust me? How about we take turns trying and see which one of us has more fun?" I thought about it for a few minutes and said, "No, I don't want to go this way. If you want to go there next week for research purposes, that's one thing, but actively participating is out of the question. I don't want any involvement from any of us." "Then it's okay. Trust me and leave the organization to me. I have Judy's number, and I will contact her to see how far they are willing to go and what their boundaries are." So we decided, and at least I slept better that night than I had in a long time. The weekend was spent gardening and preparing for our vacation, which was only 2 weeks away. Anne and I had sex every night, but I felt like something was missing, but I couldn't figure out what it was. I thought that perhaps our problems, although not over, were beginning to be solved. Life returned to normal. School, everyday life, household chores, and, of course, Wednesday with the harem. I told the girls about Anna's additional names for the group, and they were amused by any of these terms. While I was doing my usual housework, I completed the database format for Sam's project and went there. He was delighted when I explained how the system worked and asked that I start populating the database with real data using his current inventory. This was a bit more than I expected, and I told him that he could hire a temporary employee to do the routine work, and I would be willing to train him or her on the system. I explained that a temporary worker would be cheaper than me, and he agreed that it made sense. Before he left, he said, "Listen, You're smart enough to realize that not every deal in this business is necessarily reflected accurately in the books. Can you create a second database with real data? I said that I could, and that after entering all the data into the current database, I would create another Model B with the corrected numbers. I warned him that Model B should never be stored on an office computer and that it was better to keep it on a flash drive. He asked some important questions about what he needed, and I suggested he find a secure place to store the flash drive where it would be convenient but easily accessible. A couple of days later, he called and said that he had found a girl to do data entry and that she was ready to start work the next day. I arrived the next morning and met an amazing girl. She was every man's dream, 5 foot 4 inches tall, and a figure that Miss World contestants would die for. Before I could focus my eyes properly, Sam told me that her name was Simone and that she was his daughter. He prepared all the documentation related to his current holdings and left us to our own devices. She explained that she was looking for a summer job but didn't want to work directly for her father in auto sales, but the role seemed like something she would enjoy. It suited her as a temporary job as she would be returning to college after the summer holidays to take a levels and maths and business studies as her electives. She was a quick learner and was soon busy entering data. She would sometimes stop to ask random important questions about why this field or that, and would easily accept my answers. I left her working and went to find Sam. He was standing with a dark-skinned man, and I mistook him for a client, so I slowed down. But when Sam saw my confusion, he called me. He introduced me to his partner and said that Andrew owned several nightclubs and that he might have more business for me. Sam left us to talk, and I found Andrew to be pleasant and easily approachable. After some time, I agreed to fulfill his accounting requirements. We set up an initial meeting, and before he left, I asked, "Why did you decide to ask me to be your accountant?" He smiled and said, "Sam recommended you and said you know how to be discreet. My business also involves a lot of cash transactions, and although I pay taxes like everyone else, I don't want to pay more than I have to. You know what I mean?" I smiled and assured him that restraint was my forte. This is how my business began, and little did I know that over the next few months, I would be drawn deeper into the local small business scene. At home, our lives returned to normal. We still made love, but it was more like satisfying a sexual need rather than the deep love we had previously shared. I didn't particularly like this position, but I didn't see an easy way to solve the problems we were facing. Any attempt to start a discussion about what we were doing with our marriage was met with denial that anything was wrong. So I took the easy way out and accepted this as another difficult period that we will overcome. It was the Thursday before our next meeting with Peter and Judy when Anna called and said she had to stay late at work because of an article and didn't need to cook dinner for her. She was planning to dine out that evening. This was unusual. Usually her schedule was planned down to the minute, and she communicated any changes in advance. It was only after she hung up that I realized she didn't say what article she was working on. So that evening, after putting the kids to bed and settling in, I found myself suddenly alone. I logged on to the computer and checked my email. On impulse, I checked Anna's personal email, but she had changed her password and I couldn't gain access. Again, I thought it was strange. She had the account since our first marriage, and she had never changed it before. My suspicions were completely heightened. What the hell is going on here? Firstly, working until late hours with short notice. Secondly, a changed password. Was I paranoid? Could she be cheating on me? I started trying to gain access to her account. I tried all the usual options, baby names, special words we used together, and finally, just as I was about to give up, I looked at the calendar on the table and noticed that it still showed June. It was now mid-July, and I was sure I had turned the page. I noticed that one word on one of the advertisements surrounding the calendar was highlighted. I went back to the computer and tried again. Bingo, I logged into her email. Looking through them, there was nothing suspicious in the inboxes or folder headers. If I hadn't looked through every folder, I wouldn't have found anything to confirm my suspicions. As a final thought, I checked my deleted folder and found one email that made my heart sink. It was from Pat Cairns, or at least the sender's name was Pat Cairns. Reading the short note, I realized that she was confirming the cancellation of the next appointment, but continued by suggesting that she and Jim looked forward to seeing her tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening. I checked the date and confirmed that she meant tonight. Now I began to suspect that this was not an article she was working on, but a personal event, and I was not invited. I was stunned. I sat down and tried to think rationally. It could have been an innocent business meeting, but why would Pat be there? There were no hints as to the reason for the meeting tonight, but if it was a business meeting, why didn't Anna just say so? The more I thought about it, the less sure I was that she was cheating. I decided not to make any hasty moves, but will keep a close eye on Anna and see if her routine changes in the coming weeks. Anna came home around 10:30, and her appearance was completely normal. She came up to me and kissed me on the lips. I thought it tasted different and tried to determine what it tasted like. Then it dawned on me mint gum. She must have been brushing her teeth or chewing gum, and I never knew her to chew gum. She pulled me to my feet and said, "If you have nothing else to do, I have an offer." I was so excited by the promise in the kiss that all thoughts of mint flavor disappeared from my mind. I chased her into the bedroom and got naked in record time. We made love. After that, I remembered the mint flavor and her sudden need to stay late at work. I was sure that she had not been with anyone sexually that evening. I couldn't find any evidence that she cheated on me. On Saturday evening, after we had arranged for a babysitter, Anne and I went to visit Peter and Judy. Peter met us at the door and offered us drinks, after which he led us into the basement, where Judy was already prepared for some kind of ritual, blindfolded and bound. Peter began to conduct his experiments using various devices that, as I understood, were designed to enhance sensations. Judy didn't seem to feel comfortable, but she complied. Anne, standing nearby, watched with tension. I noticed how closely she watched every movement. It seemed that she was absorbed in what was happening. When Peter invited her to take part, she agreed. I tried to intervene, feeling that the situation was beyond what I could accept. Exclaiming, I asked Anne to stop. However, she reacted very strongly to my words, saying that all she does is respond to Judy's needs, and that she considers this the norm. I was shocked by her reaction and couldn't understand how she could take part in this so easily. I realized that our relationship had reached a critical point. Despite her attempts to talk, Anne chose to stay and continue observing, stating that she needed to study what was happening for her work. This was the moment when I realized that perhaps she had already made the decision that she cared about more than our marriage. When I came home, I told the nanny. I checked on the kids and tried to watch TV, but it was no use. My mind was still processing the events of the evening, and the look of pleasure on my wife's face did not disappear. I must have fallen asleep sitting in the dark. I was awakened by the sound of a car approaching and stopping at our fence. I looked at my watch. It was already after 3 in the morning. What the hell has she been doing for the last 5 hours? I went to the window and looked outside as my wife got out of the car and calmly walked along the path to our door, as if nothing was bothering her. Anne walked into the house, humming to herself, threw down her coat, and took off her shoes without even noticing me sitting on the sofa. She turned to me, and her mood instantly changed, demanding an explanation. "Why did you leave me at Peter and Judy's?" "I was just doing research for my article. You knew that was the purpose of the visit before we left." "I couldn't leave without finishing the job." I tried to maintain my composure and answered softly. "As far as I remember, we agreed to observe and not participate, but you changed that. After that, I gave you enough opportunities to leave with me, but you not only refused, but also allowed him to behave with you like some kind of woman of easy virtue. To top it all off, you deliberately humiliated me by kissing him. Did you let him have sex too?" I demanded, my attempts to control my anger fading. "No, I didn't let him do that," she answered. "I'm sorry I kissed him, but your demand that I leave with you was unjustified, and I needed to reaffirm my independence." He wanted me, and Judy was very willing to help him persuade me, but I refused. "You and I agreed that we would never cheat on each other, and I didn't cheat, although I was tempted, I must admit. Well, you definitely did it. You may have just asserted yourself after our marriage. As soon as I said that, I realized that I had gone too far. I believed her when she said she wasn't unfaithful, but she was testing my luck and my patience. It all started with me becoming a stay-at-home dad, and her growing independence from me and our kids turned her into something of an alpha partner. I cornered her with my last statement, and, as I expected, she began to struggle. I admit, I have become more independent since I started earning money in this house. If you stopped slacking around and got yourself a job, this might not have happened, but I also learned something. I like being the one who brings home the money, I like being the boss of my magazine, and I like being in control of my life. So blame yourself if you can't handle this new version of me. It's not that I can't be a stay-at-home dad. You know that's not a problem anymore. The problem is your attitude towards me. It seems you no longer respect my opinion and take every opportunity to criticize and ridicule me. I've been putting up with your crap since March, and I'm not ready to continue like this. You show me little or no respect, and I need to ask you right now, do you still love me? She looked at my question in surprise and said, "Don't be stupid. Of course, I love you, just living with you lately has been suffocating me. You question every decision I make. You no longer consult me about the kids. You make all the decisions about what they wear, what we do as a family on the weekends. I'm redundant, and it pisses me the hell off." I was about to answer the latter when she completely stunned me by saying, "I decided we needed to spend some time apart. We're too close to things here to see the big picture, and I intend to take the kids on holiday alone. You will stay here, and perhaps living apart will give you time to think about our marriage. Over the past few months, you've threatened me with divorce, slept in the living room when we had petty arguments, and generally been rude. I want to spend time reconnecting with my children, and your presence will only get in the way." This really shocked me. I thought about her words and looked at her, not knowing what to say. Finally, I said, "Are you serious? Are you really going to do this? Leave me while you go on vacation with the kids?" She stood looking at me with contempt on her face. Her eyes were bright and shining, and she showed no signs of affection. It seemed like she was waiting for me to ban her or something. When I simply said, "Okay, if this is what you want, but it's not too late to change your mind." She simply nodded and said, "How many times must I say this? You are not wanted. The children and I are leaving as planned tomorrow morning." She came upstairs, and I heard her picking up the suitcases that I had packed for vacation, and when I walked in, I saw her remove all my neatly folded things from the suitcases and throw them on the floor. She looked at me and said, "You can take them, but for now, move everything else into the living room because that's where you'll sleep until I arrange childcare." "Wait a minute," I said with more anger in my voice than I planned. "What do you mean by other arrangements? I'm their father, and I've been taking care of them since it all started 6 months ago. I intend to continue to care for them and will seek custody of them when we divorce, because, have no doubt, this is where we are heading. I was advised that I would most likely be awarded custody if we divorced, and I would probably get the family home in the settlement. You'll even have to pay me child support. So think carefully before you take the next step. Once you leave tomorrow, there will be no going back." I was bluffing. I didn't consult about our marital situation, but she didn't have to know that. I thought the threat of losing her children would at least make her think and reconsider her decision. But no, she looked at me, anger etched on her face, and she said, "I have also been advised that I have valid grounds for declaring you unfit to care for my children. I'm sorry you decided to divorce so quickly. I wanted a trial separation to see if there was anything worth saving between us. We could still save our marriage, but your unreasonable behavior clearly makes that pointless." This last statement was like a cold shower pouring over me. My anger evaporated, and I admit she really bothered me. This argument was getting out of control, and I forced myself to try to calm her down. I needed time to think about what grounds she might have for declaring me unfit to care for our children, and so I tried to diffuse the situation by saying, "I suggest we both calm down and spend this evening thinking about what we just said. Perhaps I was hasty in what I said. You should know that I still love you and don't want us to break up. I'm sure that when we both think about our words, we will regret them." On her part, she must have also begun to doubt and perhaps think about the situation, answering more softly. "I don't need time to think about it. I don't want a divorce either, and I also said some things for which I deeply apologize. Please forgive me and forget what I said about you being an unfit father. I have no reason for this. You just got so angry when you started talking about divorce. I still intend to go on vacation without you. I think we both need to spend some time apart and think about our marriage." "Fine. If that's really what you want, just you and the kids, then that's fine with me. Please keep in touch and let me know what you're up to. You know how to contact me if you have problems with your car or anything else." I picked up the remaining clothes from the floor and carried them into the living room, where I spent a restless night. I kept thinking about what she said about me being an unfit father. What reasons can she come up with? I knew her well enough to know that she wasn't making empty accusations. If she was considering divorce, and I'm sure she was heading towards that, she would want to secure custody. She also wouldn't want to pay me child support. She was too stingy to do it if she could avoid it. While I was racking my brain, I couldn't see how she could achieve the desired result. I had to be very careful and try to figure out what she was planning. The next morning after breakfast, she finished packing, and while I loaded her car and explained to two very disappointed kids that I wouldn't be going with them, she spent some time in my room on the computer. I left them with a heavy heart and returned to the house to put away the breakfast dishes. While I was doing this mundane task, it occurred to me that she had been spending a lot of time on the computer. I wondered if she was stupid enough to leave any evidence of her plans. I logged into her email and bingo. I found what I was looking for. It was in a letter to Pat Cairns. She must have been sure that I would not find out her password and forgot to delete the sent letters. It looked pretty simple. "It worked," Anne wrote. "I did as you suggested and provoked a quarrel with Gordon. It was really very easy. Please say thank you to Peter and Judy. That chance meeting with them in the restaurant was perfectly organized, and the idea for the article fulfilled its purpose. My intervention really shocked him." I paused to collect my thoughts. So she deliberately provoked a quarrel, but why? Why a quarrel right now, when our relationship was already unstable? As I read, everything became clearer. As we discussed on Thursday, I will be alone in Paris, except for the children, of course. But I'm looking forward to spending the whole night with you, uninterrupted. As you know, I was really upset when Gordon insisted that we not go to parties anymore, but I had to agree with him because of the custody issue. I can't let him get custody. The children are mine, and I want them with me. He doesn't understand it, but he is truly a subservient soul. I hoped that he would stand up for himself and insist on going on vacation with us. If he had done that, perhaps we would have had a chance, but as usual he relented. The problem is that I found my true self at your party. I love sex, and I love being demanding and getting my way. It's just a shame that he doesn't share my need for more excitement and variety in our sex life. This is it, I thought. She needs to be in control. I clearly couldn't live up to her expectations, so she decided to get rid of me. The only downside so far was that I still had no idea how she intended to secure custody of John and Pamela, so I continued reading. "I need to discuss the custody issue with you. You said on Thursday that you might have a solution to this problem, but refused to discuss it further. Did you have any other thoughts about this? Because if not, I have prepared a plan B that will get Gordon back on track for a while." Plan B, I thought. What the hell is she planning that will get me to contact her again? I also wondered what Pat Cairns might know about me that could be used to deny me custody. I still didn't understand what would prevent me from getting custody. "I have to go now, otherwise he'll come in here and ask what I'm doing. I can't wait to meet you. You are truly the best, even better than Gordon, and he's good at that. See you tonight. Love, Anne." I sat back and analyzed what I now knew and came up with a plan of action. First, I needed to go to Paris and try to get irrefutable evidence of her infidelity. Until now, I only had this letter and suspicions. I needed more if it came to a custody battle. To get to Paris, I needed a passport, money, and transportation. My little Honda was very reliable, but I was worried that it wouldn't survive such a trip without serious maintenance. Anna always kept passports on her side of the table where I was now sitting. I tried to open the lock and found that it was locked. It took me 2 minutes to pick the lock, and while searching for my passport, I also found my credit and debit cards. The problem with money and passport is solved, now a car. I called Sam Rowling, quickly explained the cause and circumstances, and my car dealer client resolved the problem. He said he would deliver the car within an hour, and it happened. I quickly packed a small bag with the necessary things for a short stay and prepared to leave. When I was getting ready to leave, I remembered the camera and took it too. I needed proof, and what better way to record what was happening in Paris than a video camera? I locked the house and left with more determination and confidence in what I was doing than I had in months. It was nice, if not in control, to have a workable plan to solve the problem. I was able to catch the first available ferry from Dover and was soon on my way to the Disneyland Paris resort. I knew which hotel to find my family at, and it was about 8:30 in the evening when I arrived for check-in. Approaching the counter, the elevators opened and Anna stepped out with Jim and Pat Cairns. Luckily, they were so immersed in their own world that they didn't notice me. I watched them walk into the bar and thought to myself, enjoy it while you can. I stopped at the reception and asked for an additional access card to my room. The receptionist checked her computer and said, "Your wife said you won't come, but that's no problem, you're already booked. Here is your card, number 568. I thanked her and told her not to mention my arrival to my wife, as I wanted to surprise her. She assured me that she would be very discreet, so I gave her €10 for her troubles. I looked at my watch. It was already after 9, so John and Pamela should be fast asleep. I knew that Anna would not leave them alone until they were fast asleep, but I still tried to be very quiet when I entered the room. The small night lamp was on, so there was no need to turn on additional lighting. It was a family room with a king-size bed and 2 single beds. I checked on John and Pamela. They were fast asleep and looked as angelic as little sleeping children can. Looking at them, I thought about what the future holds for them. I could not deprive them of the pain that was to come, only to ensure that they shared it with me. I also noticed that the room had a connecting door, which made me make a mental note to check with the front desk to see who had booked the room next door. I hid my small bag behind the back of the chair, where Anna was unlikely to notice it, and quietly left the room. I didn't want to be there when she returned. I went down to the bar, using the stairs to avoid Anna and the Cairns. Keeping my guard up, I made my way into the bar and found a quiet corner in a dimly lit area. I ordered a drink from the bartender while I casually looked around the room. They weren't at the bar, so I assumed they were still at dinner and took the opportunity to make a quick call to the internal phone at the reception. The receptionist confirmed that Mr. and Mrs. Cairns had checked in for 2 nights and were in room 569. I couldn't help but smile at the irony of room 569. Armed with this information, I wondered why for only 2 nights, and then it dawned on me. As the publisher and editor of a mid-sized magazine, Jim and Anna could not be away from the office for more than a day or two. Jim Cairns must have held the castle while Anna was on vacation. Suddenly, they appeared at the bar and were still so absorbed in themselves that they did not bother to look for familiar faces. Why should they? Anna was confident that her husband was safely back in England without money or a passport to travel anywhere. The Cairnses had no reason to worry about being seen by someone they knew, so they weren't on guard. I watched them talk, and when the small table next to them became vacant, I walked over to it. It was separated from them by one of those big flower pots that hotels and offices favor, and there was little chance of them noticing me. I overheard their conversation and was not surprised that their conversation was mostly flirting. Anna then changed the subject and asked if they had a solution to her custody problem. A little shyly, Jim said, "Did you know that one of our rules is that photography is strictly prohibited?" He fell silent. Anna nodded in agreement, then continued, "Well, it's not entirely strict. Pat and I love to relive some of the best moments afterwards, so we film videos in certain rooms when we get to be the hosts. We have one particular clip that may be useful for you. It shows Gordon having sex with two women, and with a little editing, it might help you solve the problem. Are you sure he can't prove that the video was altered? Anna asked excitedly. No, it's practically impossible, but I'm sure you can manipulate Gordon simply by the threat of exposing him as a multiple cheater and an addict. After all, the woman who successfully organized this small gathering must be able to deceive a gullible man like Gordon. I watched as Anna smiled and said, "If the video is as good as you say, he won't understand what happened to him." I quietly left at that moment. I had all the necessary information. The only thing missing was proof of her infidelity, evidence that I hoped I would receive later that night. I went out for a walk, patiently waiting for them to do their dirty business. It was about 11 when I cautiously returned to the reception, and a quick glance at the bar confirmed that they had left. I waited another half hour and quietly entered our room. The kids were still fast asleep, and I noticed that the connecting door was half open, just as I had hoped. I knew Anna would want to know if the kids woke up. I carefully took the camera out of my bag and turned it on. There were actually two doors between the rooms. One on my side was completely open, and the other was only 3 inches open. I went to the connecting door and opened it a little. Luckily, the door opened towards the bed, and I could see everything, even in dim lighting. I continued to shoot them until the low battery light came on. I prudently took a spare battery with me and quietly followed it into my bag. I changed the battery and was back in action in time. I left them for now and went to sit next to the kids, watching them sleep, unaware of the crap that was in store for them. I stepped back, put my things away, and left the room. I decided to stay one more night to see what else they had planned, since Jim mentioned at the end of their activities that they had a surprise for Anna for Sunday evening. I was very tired and dozed off in the car until the morning. I found a small cafe open for early breakfast and had a quiet breakfast. The cafe had a good view of the hotel parking lot, and around 10 o'clock I noticed Jim and Pat, along with Anna and the kids, board the hotel shuttle bus to the theme park. I knew they would be gone most of the day, so I returned to room 568 and took the opportunity to use the restroom, shower, and shave. After completing the procedures, I looked longingly at the bed and decided that since it was paid for, it might be worth using it. I must have slept for about 4 hours. I suddenly woke up in a slight daze before remembering where I was and why. I stood up and noticed that Anna had left her laptop on the table. It was still on and in the system, so I took the opportunity to check what it was doing. The login history showed that she entered Lloyd's Bank. It was strange because we used NatWest Bank. I delved a little further and came across the login protocols. I knew that Anna was bad at remembering passwords and most likely had a file somewhere on her computer to refresh her memory if necessary. A quick search in Word showed that this was indeed the case. The last file opened was called Passwords. After that, it was easy to enter. It turned out that she had been holding an account with Lloyd's for several years. This was news to me. She always received her freelance income into our joint NatWest account. Now, looking at her file history, I saw that she was paid much more for her articles than she had declared to me, and since she took control of the family finances, her salary and bonuses amounted to almost £30,000. I hastily wrote down the details, account number, passwords, etc., for future use. This new development required serious thought. I quickly scanned the rest of her files and didn't find anything suspicious at first glance. I'll need more time with her laptop to be sure. It's time to leave. They'll be back soon. I made the bed and checked that everything was in the same place as I found it and left. I was very hungry, so I got into the car and drove to Paris. I decided to find a cafe or restaurant far enough away to be safe from running into Anna or the Kierns. If they followed the previous night, then they will eat at the hotel. I ate leisurely and walked around Paris, killing time. I wondered what surprise they had planned, and finally, around 9 o'clock, I decided they had enough time and headed back to the hotel and room 568. I entered the room secretly as I was not sure whether they had returned from dinner. As soon as I entered, I saw that there were more of them in the group. That was enough for me, and I was about to leave when I saw Jim gesturing for Pat and Simon to come over to him. He was standing next to the door, and as they approached me, I thought they had noticed me, but they stopped so close to the door that I could have reached out and touched them. I turned the camera back to record what they had to say. They were so close that the faces in the pictures would have been too dark to see. Jim nodded toward the bed. I told you that she would become an asset to our group. Now we need a little more insurance to make sure she has no doubts about continuing after this night, Simon said. I agree. We bet a lot on this woman of easy virtue. Our adult film spin-off business needs some new blood, and now it's introducing our next damn star. I have organized the next filming session for September, and she needs to be ready to participate, Pat said. I think I know how to make her submissive if she tries to refuse now. Can't you see, she will be horrified that these photos will come out because it will prove that she is unfit to take care of her children. This is the best weapon and insurance we could have. I can edit photos to remove your faces from the frame so our identities are preserved. They argued a bit, and I took the opportunity to go to the toilet to hide my presence. The phone on our nightstand started ringing. As the three of them left the room, there was a rush and Anne rushed to answer the phone. I don't know what was said, but when Anne hung up, she quickly checked on John and Pamela. Jim and Pat stood at the door, clearly waiting to hear what was going on. It's okay, it was just a trick. I have an alarm in my car, and someone needs to come down and turn it off, Anne said. Give me the keys. I'll go figure it out, Jim said decisively. Anne handed him the keys, and he quickly went and got dressed. Anne and Pat exchanged glances and smiled. Simon and the other two men were also getting dressed and preparing to leave. I think their work was finished by evening. In any case, the mood has changed. Anne followed Pat into the other room, and I heard them say goodnight to each other. The door closed, and I waited a few minutes before slipping out and down the fire escape stairs. Now I had everything I needed, so I didn't stay any longer and went home, arriving early in the morning. Having come to my senses, I immediately went to bed and, despite complete exhaustion, it was difficult for me to fall asleep. I must have passed out at some point, because when I woke up again, I was woken up by the phone ringing. I felt for my watch and was shocked to see that it was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I jumped out of bed and went to answer the call when the answering machine came on. I left him to take the message and went to the toilet to shower and get dressed. I checked my message indicator and saw that Sam Rawlings had asked me for the latest news. Instead of calling him back, I decided to return the car he lent me. I thanked him for his help, and he insisted that I sit down. He must have seen from my face that my trip was a disaster. He offered me some strong whiskey, and after I relaxed a little, I began to tell him. He asked what my next steps were, and I answered simply, "It's over. I still can't believe that the woman I was with over the weekend was my wife, my lover, and the mother of my children. She undermined everything I believed about our marriage, and did it so deliberately. She planned all of this to make her fantasies come true, and not only that. I'm sure she was in it to get custody of John and Pamela, and to deprive me of the last good thing in my life, information about her finances. This only strengthens my belief that she has long wanted to consummate our marriage, but lacked the confidence. My dismissal, her new job, and my transition to the role of house husband gave her the opportunity to see a way out, and she took it. Sam looked at me sadly and said, "I have a good lawyer you should contact, and I think you should seek his advice." I agreed with his presentation of the situation, and he immediately called his lawyer to set up a meeting for the next day. That evening, I tried to call Anna on her cell phone, but it went straight to message, so I hung up. I called the hotel and asked to be connected to number 568. The phone was answered almost immediately. I asked if she was okay, and she assured me that everything was fine. I asked to speak to John, and she invited him. He was full of the fun they had in the park and the things they did. Pamela was a little more reserved. She was at that age when the phone made her cringe, but she recognized my voice, and I almost cried when she suddenly said, "I love you, Dad. Why aren't you here with us?" I dismissed her with the excuse I had used before. Anne returned and was devastated. We talked a little more before saying goodbye. No, "I love you," or any other kind words. The next day, I met with my lawyer and explained the situation. He asked about the video and if he could keep a copy. He'll watch it later and give me his opinion later. I gave him copies of bank statements and printed emails. He informed me that, given the unusual circumstances, it was likely that she would be granted custody even without video evidence of her duplicity. He told me he would get an answer tomorrow. I returned home after visiting the local hardware store to purchase new locks for all of our home's exterior doors. I spent the rest of the day installing them and changing the garage door opener code. In the evening, I called Anna and talked to my children. I missed them terribly, and it tore me apart that we were apart. I, of course, also talked to Anna, but did not mention what was about to happen. I was visited by a local SID officer who asked me about the circumstances under which I took the video. I went through it all again with them, and they asked me to accompany me to the police station. Before leaving, they asked for the original CD, but I refused to give it to them. I called my lawyer, and he advised me to get another copy and give them the original, which is what I did. We went to the station, and my lawyer met me and walked me through the whole process. Basically, everything was as I told them, and once the formalities were completed, they became more helpful. They informed me that they would not take any direct action against the people involved until my wife returned to the UK. The elder of the two said, "Do you know that she can go to trial?" "On what charge?" I asked. "Well, in your testimony you confirmed that when you entered room 568 on the first evening, the children were alone. Your wife was in the bar and restaurant for several hours, leaving them unattended. This can be regarded as neglect. If she left them alone on any subsequent evenings, it was determined that she might be in serious trouble." I sat stunned. Although I wanted my wife to be punished and to feel some of the pain she caused me, I had no desire to see her face charges of neglect. She was still the mother of our children, and she was good too. I was about to object when my lawyer grabbed my arm and whispered to me not to say anything more. It was difficult to talk to her that evening, knowing that she was in some kind of trouble and that it was my fault, but I could not risk warning her. My children were still with her. On the last night of their stay at Disneyland Paris, Anna called me. I was so surprised that I almost dropped my phone. What now? I thought, coming to my senses. She talked forever, as if our breakup was unimportant, and nothing changed her feelings for me. I was about to ask her to get down to business when she suddenly blurted out, "Gordon, can you come and meet us in Rennes tomorrow? I checked if there is a flight that arrives at noon. We can meet there and continue our holiday together as a family." I was dumbfounded at the impudence of this woman. First, she staged our trial separation and went on vacation without me. Then she spent the weekend with someone else, and now she wants us to make up. What has changed? I thought. I must have been silent for a while because she had to ask, "Gordon, are you there?" I thought, let's have a little fun and tease her a little. And he said, "Haven't you forgotten that I don't have money or a passport? Did you hide them because I have to book or pay for the flight?" She had an answer ready and told me where to find my passport and credit cards. So I continued teasing her, "Why do you want me to come?" I realized that I made a huge mistake by insisting on our separation and depriving you of our family vacation. I reconsidered my decision and realized that I truly love you and need you here with me. I love our intimate moments. They are always the best. I need you. John and Pamela miss you very much and cry themselves to sleep at night because you are gone. They're driving me crazy asking why you can't be with us, so please, please tell me you'll come tomorrow. If you come, I promise you a week of nights full of constant sex, as you wish. Now I understand her motive. She is tired of being responsible for two noisy children and wants to shift some of the work to me. This has nothing to do with the fact that she misses me. Everything is about her again. She wanted time to herself, and maybe she and Simon had another night of sex and wanted the kids out of the picture. She probably brought me there and created a new conflict so that she could then leave with her lover and enjoy herself. Well, I wasn't going to believe her. Sorry, but I have other things to do next week. I have new clients and they urgently need my services. So, sorry and thank you. But no thank you. I, too, have doubts about our marriage, and I think we should continue with this trial separation as you asked. I can make a decision when you return from vacation. She was unhappy with my answer and made that clear. I let her continue for a few minutes and then just hung up. The phone rang again almost immediately. Don't you dare hang up. I'm not done talking to you yet. It was not a conversation with me, but a conversation above me. But I'm done talking to you. I'll see you when you get back. I hung up again before she could answer. The phone rang again, and I let it go to voicemail and then went to the pub. The next day, I packed all her clothes into plastic bags and stored them in the garage. I wasn't entirely surprised when her car pulled into our driveway. She sat there, pressing the button on the opener, trying unsuccessfully to open the door, wondering why it didn't work. I modified the code for this purpose. She got out of the car, and before she could come to me, our two children in the form of John and Pamela rushed into my arms and hugged me. I held them tightly as tears streamed down my cheeks. I finally pushed them away, but they refused to move far from me. They seemed to want to make sure I was really here and wouldn't leave without them. Meanwhile, Anna stood and watched us become acquainted again, with a stony expression on her face. She didn't look beautiful when she looked so menacingly, but I strangely remained indifferent. I carried the children inside, and Anna followed me, still silent. She went into her bedroom and immediately came back out. "Where are all my clothes?" she demanded. "In the garage. You can put it in the car when you leave," I answered. "What do you mean? If anyone is leaving, it's you," she shouted at me. I didn't want to get into an argument, so I picked up the phone and asked for Detective Anderson. When I was transferred, I simply said, "My wife just came home. I suggest that if you want to talk to her, you better come now, since I don't know where she will be tonight." My wife looked at me in shock. "Who was it, and what interview are you talking about?" "Police," I said calmly. "They want your statement about your stay in France." "What the hell are you up to, bastard? Did you arrange this for the sake of our separation? If you do, you'll be in big trouble." I hesitated and thought, what the hell? "I am divorcing you due to infidelity. I will demand custody of the children, this house, and alimony. I know about what happened in Paris. I have a copy of the video that I took on Saturday and Sunday nights. You may not want to watch it because you were the main star and still remember most of it, but I advise you to pay special attention to the last 5 minutes. You will find this very revealing." She sat up, stunned by what I had just said. Were you there?" she whispered. "Yes, I was there and saw and heard everything. I have to give you credit for your plan. It almost worked, but you made one mistake too many. You shouldn't have changed your email password. I discovered this by accident and wondered why. Then you were stupid enough to leave the calendar in the wrong month with the new password highlighted. Even then, you could have avoided this if you had not forgotten to delete the sent folder and the deleted email folder. One email told me everything I needed to know. The rest you can guess for yourself." She ran to the master bedroom and slammed the door halfway. I heard her sobs, but her tears no longer mattered to me. I fed the children and went for a walk with them in the park. When we returned, the police were standing at the door. They performed the same procedure on her as they did on me and took her to the station for an official statement. I put the kids to bed despite their protests and took the opportunity to unload all their belongings from the car. Then I packed their clothes again along with Anna's clothes. About 2 hours must have passed when she returned, looking very depressed and remorseful. She asked, "Can we talk?" "There's no point," I replied sharply. "You completely ridiculed our marriage and manipulated me into an impossible position. You made your bed, now lie down in it." Picking up a copy of the video, I placed it in her hands and said, "Watch this and see where your last actions led. Now get out of my life. All future communications will be through our lawyers." As she left, I couldn't help but add, "By the way, I found your account at Lloyd's Bank, so don't spend it until the court decides on the division of property. My lawyer knows this too and has a copy of the closing balance as of tonight. You'll have to explain every penny you spent." She left, and I didn't see her until she appeared in divorce court. I did not deny her the right to visit John and Pamela, but Social Security placed a ban on her visiting them until the trials were completed. Anna was not prosecuted in the end, and I did not object to her right to see the children every weekend. Every time I saw her after that, she looked desperately thin and exhausted. She moved out of town and found another job in publishing, which limited her time with John and Pamela. She complied with the terms of the child support set by the court, and I saved money for their education. I didn't need the money as my startup business was thriving, and within 3 years, I was a successful accountant. My personal life was on hold for almost 2 years until I met another young accountant at a graduate career fair. She was the first real woman I felt attracted to after my divorce. I hired her on the spot, and within 6 months we were a couple. I recently asked her to marry me, and now we are actively planning a wedding. I've learned a valuable lesson from being a homemaker and no longer consider household chores to be solely a woman's job. Anyway, my new fiancé Babs makes sure I do most of the cooking. As for the harem, I still keep in touch with them and get together with our partners about twice a year. Sometimes I think back on everything that happened in those fateful 6 or 7 months when my marriage fell apart and wonder if I could have done more to prevent it from falling apart. The conclusion I came to was, damn it, I don't know. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.